Hey everybody, I'm Nicholas Skinner with Skinner Games, and you're here for another episode of Game Reviews in 5 minutes or less. In this episode, we'll be talking about Dungeons & Delvers, the Black Book. Dungeons & Delvers Black Book is a really interesting fusion between 4th edition Dungeons & Dragons and the old school 1990s box set that kind of looked like a board game. So it's really streamlined in the way that character creation functions. For people who haven't really played a lot of role-playing games, it's really easy to get into this game. And as much as I'm not a huge fan of 4th edition, which I allude to periodically in many of these videos, I really like what David Guile and Melissa Fisher did with this game. Now, we ran through a Dungeons & Delvers game in the past on our other show, Retro Role-Playing, but this is a slightly different version of the game that they created. That one was based on their own custom mechanics, and this one is a D20-based system. So, like many other D20-based games, you get your basic attributes, your strength, your intelligence, your charisma, and so forth. You get your 4 base races and some basic classes, and you begin playing. However, they shift things a little bit, in a very interesting way. The 4 races you get in the basic versions of Dungeons & Dragons is usually human, elf, dwarf, and halfling. But they shake it up a little bit and go with a kobold, but not the kobold you're thinking of. Where the traditional kobold is either kind of a doggish humanoid, small, or a small dragon-like creature. These ones adhere more toward the old Germanic lore of a kobold, so they're like a mining spirit. They can actually have some limited phasing ability through stone, which is really kind of cool. They also open it up a bit more, so it's not just mines. It's kind of household spirits and spirits of the ship. They really emphasize the old Germanic heritage of spirits existing in the world around you. This game also only goes to 5 levels, so it's a nice little introduction. And then you have your 4 basic classes, your fighter, your cleric, your rogue, and your wizard. And while they definitely shake things up and vary it in between the different classes for different things, well, the classes in this system are really based on talents. In almost every level for every class, you get an option to choose from, some sort of talent or something to pick, so that leveling up your character isn't just some boring, tedious task. So what I really like about what they did with the wizard is they gave them, the wizard schools of magic. So your abjurer, your evoker, and your illusionist. But they also made spells branch off of these particular schools of magic. So to get the spell shield, for example, you would have to be an abjurer, and you would also have to get the prerequisite spell before you get shield, which is mage armor. This adds a little bit more complication to a wizard. It also adds a really interesting level of depth. So one thing that I've always found interesting with wizards in Dungeons & Dragons games is you just have to go find the spell and you know the spell. Well, what about the basics? We have wizard universities that people play and game with, but you don't really get a lot of wizard apprentices who need to know spells before they can get to other spells. I mean, before you fly, don't you think you should know levitation first? They actually take that idea and kind of run away with it. And a few other things that you don't see very often that are kind of throwbacks to 4th edition are the vitality and wound level points and a couple of other things. And they really integrated it very successfully. One thing that I really appreciate that they addressed here is crafting. I don't know how the rest of you feel about crafting, but crafting is such a huge part of fantasy worlds to me. It's really sad that nobody really addresses it that much. And it's really kind of lost on Dungeons & Dragons. In a lot of the settings that they produce, items are a huge deal. So it's really kind of odd to me that they haven't really addressed crafting. But the Black Book totally does, and it's amazing. The section really isn't that long, and there aren't a whole lot of extra rules to put into place to really give a good emphasis on what characters can do outside of normal adventuring and combat. So when you learn skills, you learn them in particular ways. You're a novice, an apprentice, an adept, an expert, or a master. And depending on which level you are, it does different things to your crafting ability. For instance, it allows you to create mastercraft or magically imbued items. However, there is a mild drawback per se, if you will, that you also have a higher material cost and it takes a longer time for you to make stuff, but you make cooler stuff. The interior art is also created by the authors, which is cool. So you get a nice consistent feel throughout the whole book. And they have various small pieces and they have various full page pieces. Here's an example of the full page piece if it can be in here. And I like the contrast between the dark shadows and the colors that kind of make the image pop. To me, it really reminds me of the old Hellboy comic books, and you can't really go wrong with that. Well, all in all, the Dungeons & Delvers Black Book is a really solid game to introduce players into the role-playing world. You can get it in print off of DriveThruRPG or RPG Now, and even though it's just 5 basic levels, you can get a lot of really good role-playing and a lot of good gaming in with this. I highly encourage you all to take a look at Dungeons & Delvers Black Book. Awful Good Games comes out with a lot of really cool stuff for it on a regular basis. If you like this review, please give us that old thumbs up and subscribe to our channel. If there are some things you'd like to hear about some more, leave a comment in the section below. Check out our other show, Retro Role Playing, where we play through a lot of these games and some other things that we throw in. Thanks for watching, and as always, happy gaming!